I never imagined that planning my husband's funeral would become the moment I discovered who my real family was. Standing beside David's mahogany casket, I adjusted the white roses one final time, making sure everything looked perfect. The black dress I'd chosen was conservative, respectful, exactly what David would have wanted. The funeral home smelled of lilies and grief, and I felt like I was drowning in both. "Rebecca, dear," my mother-in-law Margaret's voice cut through my thoughts. Her tone had that familiar edge I'd learned to recognize over our 5 years of marriage. "We need to discuss something important about the service." I turned to face her, noting how she avoided eye contact. Margaret Martinez had never been warm toward me, but today felt different. There was something almost secretive in her manner. "What is it, Margaret?" I asked, smoothing down my skirt. "Everything's arranged exactly as David specified in his wishes." "Well, that's just it." She glanced toward her husband Robert, who was adjusting his tie nervously. "There's someone special who should be here, someone David cared about very much." A cold feeling crept up my spine. "Who are you talking about?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "A young woman from his office. They were close. She's been devastated by his passing." I felt my heart skip. David had mentioned colleagues, of course, but never anyone he was particularly close to. "I don't understand. Who is this person?" "Her name is Sarah Thompson," Robert interjected, his voice gruff. "She worked in David's department, 28 years old, such a sweet girl." The way they said her name, with such careful reverence, made my stomach churn. But I pushed the feeling down. These were David's parents. They were grieving, too. Maybe they just wanted to honor all the people who cared about their son. "Of course," I said softly. "Anyone who cared about David is welcome here." That's when I heard the soft click of heels on marble. I turned toward the entrance of the funeral home, and my world tilted on its axis. The woman walking toward us was beautiful in that effortless way some people possess. Auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her black dress was perfectly fitted. But what made my breath catch wasn't her beauty. It was the unmistakable curve of her belly beneath that black fabric. 7 months pregnant, at least. "Sarah, sweetheart," Margaret rushed toward her with open arms, embracing her like family. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be so difficult for you." My mind raced, calculating dates, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 7 months pregnant meant she'd gotten pregnant around the time David had been working late so many nights, around the time he'd been stressed, distant, apologetic. "Mrs. Martinez." Sarah's voice was soft, almost musical. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes filled with what looked like genuine sorrow. "I'm so sorry for your loss. David was special." The way she said his name, with such intimate familiarity, sent ice through my veins. "She belongs with us," Margaret declared suddenly, her voice carrying across the quiet funeral home. Other mourners turned to look, but Margaret didn't seem to notice or care. Sarah should sit in the front row with the family. I stared at my mother-in-law, feeling like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. "The front row is for immediate family, Margaret." "Include her," Robert added firmly, stepping beside his wife in a show of solidarity I'd rarely seen from them about anything. She was important to David. She should be honored as such. The pieces were falling into place now, each one landing like a physical blow. The pregnancy timing, the way they spoke about her, the insistence that she belonged with the family. My husband, my David, had been having an affair, and his parents had known. They'd all known, everyone except me. I looked at Sarah again, really looked at her. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and for a moment I felt a strange sort of kinship with her. We were both mourning David. We'd both loved him in our own ways, and we were both apparently carrying pieces of him forward, though hers was far more obvious than the memories I carried. "You're right," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "She should be with us." Margaret's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She'd clearly expected a fight, maybe even a scene, but I was done fighting. What was the point now? David was gone, and whatever secrets he'd kept had died with him, or so I thought. "Rebecca." Sarah spoke directly to me for the first time, her voice hesitant. "I don't want to cause any trouble. I can sit in the back. I needed to be here." I studied her face, looking for signs of calculation or manipulation, but all I saw was grief. Real, raw grief that mirrored my own. Whatever had happened between her and David, whatever lies had been told, she was hurting too. "The front row is fine," I said quietly. "We're all here because we love David." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were true. Even if I was just learning the full extent of who we included. That's when I heard the heavy footsteps behind me. I turned to see my brother Michael walking through the entrance, his tall frame commanding attention even in this place of hushed voices and careful movements. He was carrying a leather briefcase I'd never seen before, and his expression was grimmer than usual. Michael had always been protective of me, sometimes annoyingly so. When David and I got engaged, he'd spent weeks interrogating him about his intentions, his finances, his family history. I'd been embarrassed at the time, but now, "Rebecca." Michael's voice was steady as he approached our little group. He nodded politely to Margaret and Robert, then his gaze settled on Sarah. If he was surprised by her presence or her condition, he didn't show it. "Michael," I managed, grateful for his presence, even though I couldn't quite understand why he looked so prepared. "I'm glad you're here. I wouldn't be anywhere else." He set his briefcase down carefully beside one of the chairs. "Though I think we need to have a conversation before the service begins." Margaret stepped forward, her maternal instincts clearly sensing a threat. "This isn't the time for family drama, Michael. We're here to honor David." "Oh, we're definitely here to honor David," Michael replied, his tone conversational but with an edge that made my skin prickle. "In fact, I think it's time we honored him with the truth." The funeral home seemed to grow quieter, if that was possible. Even the soft organ music in the background felt muted. "It's time someone told the truth," Michael continued, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "About David, about this family, about what really happened in the months before he died." Margaret's face went pale. Robert took a step backward. And Sarah wrapped her arms protectively around her belly and looked like she might bolt for the door. But Michael wasn't done. "You see," he said, opening his briefcase with deliberate calm, "David came to see me 3 weeks before he died. He was troubled. Said he'd discovered some things about his family that he couldn't live with. Said he needed help figuring out what to do about it. He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. He asked me to hold on to some things for him, just in case something happened." "Michael," I whispered, not sure if I wanted him to continue or stop. Part of me was desperate for answers, but another part was terrified of what those answers might be. "David was always thorough," Michael continued, ignoring my plea, "especially when it came to protecting the people he loved. And Rebecca, he loved you more than anything in this world." He opened the folder and pulled out what looked like legal documents. "This is David's real will, the one he filed with his attorney 2 weeks before he died, not the one Margaret and Robert have been discussing with their lawyer." Margaret made a sound like a strangled gasp. "How dare you?" "The will that leaves everything to Rebecca," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "His life insurance, his savings, his portion of the family business, everything, with very specific instructions about what should happen if anyone tried to contest it." I felt like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. "Michael, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband was a good man who got caught up in a very bad situation." He pulled out another document. "And I'm saying that baby Sarah's carrying, it's not David's." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face went white and she sank into the nearest chair. Margaret looked like she might faint. Robert was staring at Michael like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "David and we were together. We loved each other." Michael's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "I don't doubt that you cared about each other, Sarah, but David was sterile. Had been since a childhood illness when he was 12. It's all documented in his medical records, which he also gave me copies of." The world was spinning too fast. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Then whose baby—" "That," Michael said, his gaze shifting to Robert, "is a very good question, isn't it, Robert?" My father-in-law's face had gone gray. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You see," Michael continued, his voice now carrying the authority of a man who'd done his homework, "David started getting suspicious when Sarah announced her pregnancy. He'd never told her about his condition. He was embarrassed about it, ashamed that he couldn't give Rebecca children. But when she claimed the baby was his, he knew something was very wrong." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long did all of you know?" Margaret was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "Rebecca, you have to understand—" "How long?" I repeated louder this time. 6 months, Robert finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We've known for 6 months." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, not just from David, though that hurt more than I could process, but from his parents, from the people who'd welcomed me into their family, who'd called me daughter, who'd sat at my dinner table and smiled at me while knowing I was living a lie. "And you," I turned to Sarah, who was still sitting in the chair, tears streaming down her face. "You knew he wasn't the father." "I thought," she started, then stopped. "I hoped. I wanted it to be true so badly that I convinced myself it was possible." "But you knew it wasn't." She nodded miserably. "Yes, I knew." Michael reached into his briefcase again and pulled out what looked like a DNA test result. David managed to get a sample for testing before he died. The results came back 2 days after his funeral was originally scheduled. He handed me the paper with steady hands. "The baby is Robert's." The words on the page blurred as I read them, but the conclusion was clear. Robert Martinez was listed as the biological father with 99.7% certainty. My father-in-law, the man who'd walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't be there, the man who'd called me his daughter, the man who'd been having an affair with a woman younger than his son. "Robert," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "is this true?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Rebecca, I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control." "A moment?" Sarah stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "A moment? Robert, we'd been seeing each other for over a year." Margaret's sobbing intensified. She'd known. Of course she'd known. How could she not know that her husband was having an affair? How could she not know that the pregnant woman they were so determined to include in David's funeral was carrying her husband's child? "A year," I repeated, the timeline crystallizing in my mind. So this started while David was still alive, while he was working late, stressed about work, coming home exhausted and worried. "He found out," Michael said quietly. "That's why he came to me. He'd hired a private investigator to look into Sarah's pregnancy, and the investigation led him to discover his father's affair. He was devastated." I thought about those last few months with David, how distant he'd become, how he'd started having trouble sleeping, how he'd seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I'd attributed it to work stress, maybe a midlife crisis. I'd never imagined. "He was going to tell you," Michael continued. He was working up the courage to tell you everything. He'd already filed for divorce from his family's business, already moved his money into accounts they couldn't access. He was planning to leave town with you, start over somewhere else. But he died first, I said numbly. Yes, and his parents thought they could control the narrative, keep the family secrets buried, make sure Sarah and the baby were taken care of without anyone asking uncomfortable questions. I looked around at all of them, Margaret still sobbing, Robert staring at the floor, Sarah holding her belly protectively. 3 people who'd been living a lie for months, who'd let me plan my husband's funeral while knowing I didn't even know who he really was. So when you insisted Sarah should sit with the family, I said to Margaret, it wasn't because she was David's girlfriend. It was because she's carrying your grandchild. Margaret nodded through her tears. We couldn't let her be alone. The baby is innocent in all this. And David, I asked, was David innocent too? David never touched her, Robert said firmly. Not that way. Yes, they were friends. Yes, he cared about her. But he never betrayed you, Rebecca. Not like that. I felt a strange mix of relief and anguish. My husband hadn't cheated on me, but he died knowing his father had. He died carrying the weight of a family secret that would have destroyed everything anyway. There's more, Michael said gently. He pulled out a letter with my name written on it in David's familiar handwriting. He wrote this for you, asked me to give it to you after the truth came out. With shaking hands, I took the letter and opened it. David's words swam before my eyes. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means Michael has told you everything, and I'm no longer here to explain it myself. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you while I was alive. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day, not for a single moment. The distance you've felt from me these past months wasn't about us. It was about me trying to figure out how to protect you from the mess my family had created. I know this will hurt. I know you'll feel betrayed and confused and angry. You have every right to all of those feelings. But please know that you were the only real thing in my life. The only honest thing. The only thing that mattered. The money. The house. Everything I've left you. It's not enough to make up for the pain my family has caused you. But it's yours. Build a new life with it. Find happiness again. You deserve so much more than the Martinez family drama. I love you always, David. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. Around me, the funeral home had filled with other mourners, but our little group remained frozen in our circle of revelations. So what happens now? I asked quietly. Now, Michael said, we have David's funeral. We honor the man he actually was, not the lies everyone thought he was living, and then you decide what you want to do with the rest of your life. I looked at Sarah, who was still crying silently. Despite everything, I felt sorry for her. She was young, pregnant, and apparently just as much a victim of Robert's manipulation as anyone else. Sarah, I said, what do you want to do about the baby? She looked up at me with surprise. I don't know. Robert promised he'd help, but after this, I think, I said slowly, that baby deserves better than the Martinez family secrets. Don't you? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I just wanted to give my child a good life, a stable family. I thought, you thought Robert would leave Margaret and marry you. He said he would, after a respectable amount of time. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about any of this. Sarah, men like Robert don't leave their wives for their mistresses. They keep their mistresses secret and let everyone else deal with the consequences. Margaret's sobbing had quieted to soft hiccups. Rebecca, please, we're still family. Despite everything that's happened, we're still family. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd raised the man I loved, who'd welcomed me into her home, who'd just spent months lying to my face about the most fundamental aspects of my life. "No, Margaret," I said finally. "We're not family. We never really were. Family doesn't lie to each other the way you've lied to me. Family doesn't let each other live in delusion while plotting behind their backs." I turned to Michael, grateful beyond words for his presence, for his investigation, for his protection of my interests when I didn't even know I needed protecting. "I want to go home," I told him. "I want to say goodbye to David properly, without all these people who turned his life into a lie." "Rebecca, wait!" Robert stepped forward, his face pleading. "Don't let this destroy everything. David wouldn't want—" "Don't you dare tell me what David would want," I snapped, feeling anger rise in my chest like a tide. "You have no right to speak for him. You made his last months on Earth a nightmare with your selfishness and your lies." The other mourners were starting to stare now, sensing the tension even if they couldn't hear the specifics of our conversation. I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them wonder. Let the truth finally see daylight. "The funeral will proceed as scheduled," I announced, my voice carrying across the room. "Anyone who actually cared about David Martinez, the real David, not the fiction his family created, is welcome to stay and pay their respects. Anyone who's here for any other reason can leave now." I walked to the front row and sat down in the seat I'd reserved for myself, the widow's seat, the seat I'd earned through 5 years of marriage to a man who'd loved me enough to try to protect me from his family's poison. Michael sat beside me, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah moved to a seat several rows back. Margaret and Robert stood frozen for several minutes before finally taking seats near the back of the room. As the service began, I realized that in some strange way, this was exactly what David would have wanted. The truth, finally out in the open. No more secrets, no more lies, no more pretending that his family was something they weren't. He was free now, and soon I would be too. The funeral service passed in a blur of hymns and hollow condolences. I sat in that front row, David's letter burning like a secret in my purse, while people who barely knew him offered platitudes about his wonderful family and bright future cut short. If only they knew. When the last mourner finally left, I remained seated, staring at the closed casket that held the man I'd thought I knew completely. Michael sat beside me in comfortable silence, his briefcase still at his feet like a guardian of secrets. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked quietly, not taking my eyes off the flowers draped across David's casket. "Yes," Michael replied simply, "but are you ready for it?" I thought about that question. Was anyone ever ready to learn that their entire life had been built on lies, that the people they trusted most had been orchestrating deceptions behind their back? But I'd come this far down the rabbit hole. There was no point in stopping now. "Tell me everything." Michael opened his briefcase again and pulled out a thick folder I hadn't seen before. David didn't just discover the affair, Rebecca. He discovered that it had been going on much longer than we thought. And he found evidence that Robert had been embezzling money from the family business to support Sarah. My stomach dropped. How much money? Over $200,000 in the past 18 months. David found altered books, falsified invoices, money being funneled through fake vendors. Robert wasn't just having an affair, he was stealing from his own family to pay for it. I thought about all the times Robert had complained about the business struggling, how he'd had to tighten belts and reduce David's salary. Meanwhile, he'd been living a double life on the company's dime. "There's more," Michael continued, pulling out what looked like medical records. Sarah wasn't just Robert's mistress, she was his patient. So patient? Robert's been seeing a therapist for sex addiction for the past 3 years. Sarah was working as a receptionist at the clinic. She was 25 when it started. Vulnerable, struggling financially, recently out of an abusive relationship. Robert was 58 and in a position of power over her employment. The pieces were clicking together now, painting a picture that was somehow even worse than I'd imagined. So he was her boss, too. Technically, yes. The clinic contracts with Robert's medical supply company. Sarah's salary was being paid through that contract, which is how he was able to hide the money trail for so long. I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic abuse of power that had been going on for years, and David had uncovered all of it in his final weeks. Did David confront them? He confronted his father 2 weeks before he died. That's when Robert made the threats. My blood went cold. What kind of threats? Michael hesitated, and I could see him weighing how much to tell me. David recorded the conversation. He was already suspicious that Robert might try to cover everything up if the truth came out. He pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the chair between us. "Rebecca, this is hard to listen to, but David wanted you to hear it if anything happened to him." With trembling fingers, I pressed play. David's voice filled the funeral home, clear and tired. "Dad, I know about Sarah. I know about the money. I know everything." Robert's voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Cold, calculating. "You know what you think you know, but you don't know what it would do to your mother if this came out. You don't know what it would do to the business, to Rebecca. Don't you dare bring Rebecca into this. This is about you lying and stealing and manipulating a young woman who trusted you." "Sarah's pregnancy changes everything, David. That baby is family. Your family. And if you try to destroy me, you'll be destroying that child's future, too." "The baby isn't mine, Dad. We both know that." A long pause. Then Robert's voice, even colder. "Prove it. And while you're trying to prove it, think about what happens to Rebecca when she finds out her perfect marriage was built on lies. Think about what happens when she learns that her husband knew about his father's affair and said nothing. Think about what happens to her reputation, her job, her future when the Martinez name becomes synonymous with scandal." David's voice broke slightly. "You're threatening me. I'm protecting this family, like I've always done, like you should be doing. Sarah and the baby stay under our protection. The business continues as usual. Your marriage continues as usual, and no one gets hurt. And if I don't agree? Then I make sure Rebecca learns some very uncomfortable truths about the man she married, about the things you did in college that I've been covering up for 15 years, about the real reason you came to work for the family business instead of pursuing that law career you wanted." The recording stopped, and I sat in stunned silence. What things from college? What had Robert been holding over David's head all these years? "There's more," Michael said gently. "David made this recording 3 days later." He pressed play again. This time, David's voice was stronger, more determined. "Dad called again today, made it clear that if I don't play along with his version of events, he'll destroy Rebecca's career. Apparently, he's been documenting every time she's used company resources for personal things, every time she printed something at the office, every time she made a personal call, every time she stayed late and used the company internet. He says he can make it look like she's been embezzling too." I gasped. I had used the office printer sometimes, made personal calls during lunch breaks, normal things that every employee did. But if someone wanted to twist those actions... David continued. "He's also threatening to tell Rebecca about Chicago, about what happened with Professor's daughter, and why I really left law school. I can't let him hurt her with that. She doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." The recording ended, and I looked at Michael with desperate eyes. What happened in Chicago? What was David hiding? Michael sighed heavily. David was accused of sexual assault in his second year of law school. The charges were eventually dropped when the girl admitted she'd made it up because she was angry about their breakup, but the damage was done. David's reputation was ruined, his career prospects destroyed. Robert used his connections to make the whole thing disappear, but he never let David forget that he owed him. My heart broke for the man I'd married. He'd been carrying this weight for 15 years, trapped by his father's manipulation, unable to tell me the truth because he was afraid of how I'd react. So when Robert threatened to tell you about Chicago, David panicked. He was terrified you'd believe he actually did it, that you'd leave him just like everyone else had. I wiped tears from my eyes, angry at Robert all over again. David had been a victim twice, once of false accusations and again of his father's manipulation of those accusations. But he was planning to tell me anyway. The letter said. The letter was written after he decided to fight back. He'd gathered enough evidence to destroy Robert completely. Bank records, medical records, recordings, witness statements. He was going to go to the police. What stopped him? Michael's expression darkened. He died before he could. The implications hung in the air between us. Michael, are you saying... I'm saying David was in perfect health. No heart problems, no medical issues. He'd just had a complete physical 2 months before he died. Clean bill of health. My mouth went dry. The autopsy said it was a heart attack. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Williams, who's been Robert's golf partner for 20 years and owes him several favors. Michael pulled out another set of documents. But David was smart. He'd been feeling unwell in the days before he died. Nausea, dizziness, fatigue. He thought Robert might try to hurt him, so he had blood tests done at a different lab. He handed me the lab results. I couldn't understand most of the medical terminology, but one line stood out. Elevated levels of digitalis, consistent with chronic poisoning. Digitalis? Heart medication. In small doses over time, it can cause the exact symptoms David was experiencing. In a large dose, it causes heart failure that looks completely natural. The funeral home suddenly felt too small, too airless. You're saying Robert killed his own son. I'm saying David believed his father was slowly poisoning him, and 3 days later he was dead. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the parking lot. This was too much, too horrible to be real. But the evidence was all there, laid out in neat folders like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. Why didn't you go to the police immediately? Because I needed more evidence than just David's suspicions. Because Robert is well connected and well respected, and accusations like this need to be ironclad. Michael stood and joined me at the window, and because I needed to make sure you were protected first. Protected how? David's will is airtight. Robert can't contest it, can't touch the money, can't claim any part of David's estate. But more than that, David set up a trust fund for Sarah's baby. I turned to stare at him. He what? He felt responsible for the child even though it wasn't his. He knew that once the truth came out, Robert wouldn't be able to support Sarah anymore, so he made provisions for the baby's care. My husband, my sweet protective husband, had been planning to take care of his father's illegitimate child, even while his father was slowly killing him. How much? Enough to ensure the child has a good life. College fund, medical care, housing allowance. But there's a condition. What condition? Sarah has to testify against Robert. She has to tell the police everything she knows about the money, the coercion, the relationship, and she has to submit to a psychiatric evaluation to determine if she was acting under duress. I thought about Sarah, young and pregnant and scared. Has she agreed? Not yet, but I think she will, especially after what happened today. She's finally seeing Robert for what he really is. A knock on the funeral home door interrupted us. Michael went to answer it, and I heard voices in the hallway. When he returned, he was followed by 2 people I didn't recognize, a middle-aged woman in a business suit and a younger man with a badge visible on his belt. "Rebecca," Michael said. "This is Detective Sarah Chen and FBI Agent Martinez. No relation to your in-laws. They've been investigating Robert's business practices for the past 6 months. Detective Chen stepped forward with a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances, but we need to ask you some questions about your husband's final weeks. David was cooperating with your investigation? He contacted us 3 weeks before his death," Agent Martinez explained. "He'd uncovered evidence of embezzlement and wanted to turn it over to authorities. We were scheduled to meet with him the Monday after he died." The timing sent chills down my spine. He was going to testify against his father. Yes, and we believe Robert became aware of David's plans. Detective Chen opened her own folder. We've been building a case against Robert Martinez for financial crimes, but your husband's death changed everything. We're now treating this as a potential homicide. What do you need from me? Everything Michael has shown you today. David's recordings, his medical records, his evidence of the embezzlement. We need it all for our case. And Sarah? Ms. Thompson has agreed to cooperate fully. She's been moved to a safe location under protective custody. She'll be testifying before a grand jury next week. I felt a strange sense of relief knowing that Sarah was safe, that she was finally going to tell the truth. Despite everything that had happened, she was as much a victim as anyone. What about Margaret? Did she know what Robert was doing? Detective Chen and Agent Martinez exchanged glances. That's complicated. We believe Mrs. Martinez was aware of the affair, but may not have known about the financial crimes or the threats against David. However, she did help cover up the relationship, which makes her an accessory. Will she be arrested? That depends on what the investigation reveals about her level of involvement. I thought about Margaret crying in the funeral home, devastated by the revelations. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd been married to a monster for 40 years without knowing it. But another part of me was still angry about the months of lies, the conspiracy to keep me in the dark. There's something else, Michael said, reaching into his briefcase one more time. David left this for you specifically. He said to give it to you only after everything else came out. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a key I didn't recognize, along with a note in David's handwriting. Storage Unit 247, Pine Street Storage. Everything you need to start over. He rented a storage unit 3 months ago, paid for 2 years in advance. I've never seen what's inside. Detective Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Martinez, we'd like to be present when you open that unit, if it contains evidence relevant to our case. Of course, I said, though part of me wanted to see what David had left me in private first. But I understood the investigation had to take priority. Agent Martinez checked his watch. The storage facility closes at 8. If we leave now, we can get there in time. As we prepared to leave the funeral home, I took one last look at David's casket. Tomorrow he'd be buried in the Martinez family plot, surrounded by generations of people who'd apparently been keeping secrets from each other for decades. But his real legacy wasn't there. It was in the evidence he'd gathered, the precautions he'd taken, the love he'd shown by trying to protect me, even from beyond the grave. I'm sorry I doubted you, I whispered to the casket. I'm sorry I didn't see what they were doing to you. Michael placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. He knew you loved him. That's what kept him fighting. The storage facility was a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. Unit 247 was in the back, away from the main traffic areas. As I inserted David's key into the lock, my hands were shaking. The metal door rolled up to reveal a space packed with boxes, filing cabinets, and computer equipment. David had essentially moved an entire office into this storage unit. Jesus, Agent Martinez breathed, surveying the contents. Your husband was thorough. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Financial records dating back 5 years, recorded phone conversations, medical documents, photographs of Robert and Sarah together in various locations, bank statements showing the movement of money from business accounts to personal ones. But the most devastating discovery was a video camera David had apparently hidden in Robert's office. Hours upon hours of footage showing Robert conducting personal business on company time, making threatening phone calls, and meeting with Sarah during work hours. This is enough to put Robert away for decades, Detective Chen said, reviewing the video files. Financial crimes, extortion, conspiracy, and now we have motive for murder. In the very back of the storage unit, I found one more box with my name on it. Inside were personal items, photo albums from our honeymoon, letters David had written me over the years, and a new letter dated just 1 week before his death. This letter was different from the first one, more urgent, more frightened. Rebecca. If you're reading this, it means I was right to be scared. Robert isn't just stealing money. He's been putting something in my coffee every morning. I feel sick all the time now, and I think he's trying to kill me. I've documented everything I can, but I need you to know that none of this was your fault. You married me in good faith, loved me completely, and gave me the happiest 5 years of my life. If I die, it's because I finally stood up to a bully who's been controlling me since I was 22 years old. The money in the offshore account is clean. It's from my own savings and investments, nothing connected to the family business. Use it to disappear if you need to. Change your name, move to another state. Whatever it takes to get away from the Martinez family poison. But if you choose to fight, you have everything you need to destroy them completely. They took my childhood, my career prospects, and finally my life. Don't let them take your future, too. I love you beyond words, David P.S. The baby Sarah's carrying deserves a chance at a better life than Robert can provide. If you can find it in your heart to help her, I know you'll raise that child with more love than the Martinez family ever showed me. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse next to the first one. 2 letters from my dead husband. 2 pieces of a puzzle that showed me exactly who I'd married and why I'd been lucky to have him. What happens now? I asked Detective Chen as we prepared to leave the storage facility. Now we arrest Robert Martinez, tonight, and we build a case that ensures he never hurts anyone else again. As we drove back into town, I watched the lights of the city pass by my window and thought about David's final request. Sarah's baby would be born into a world where its father was in prison for murder, where its paternal grandparents were disgraced and bankrupt. But it would also be born into a world where the truth had finally come to light, where the cycle of lies and manipulation had finally been broken. And maybe, just maybe, that baby would have a chance at the kind of honest, loving life that David had tried so hard to give me.